Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're heading to 1950s Nigeria with Chinua Achebe's No Longer at Ease.
A fascinating look at a nation transitioning right on the brink of independence from colonial rule.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who sent in excerpts, we'll be looking at different stages of the main character, Obi Okonkwo's life.
You know, his story really reflects the larger societal shifts happening in Nigeria.
It's like watching a nation's hopes and anxieties play out through his personal struggles.
Exactly.
So the novel starts with Obi's childhood in the village of Umuofia.
A traditional Igbo community deeply rooted in their customs.
We get this sense of the weight of expectations he carries right from his upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. The villagers see him as their golden boy, practically handpicking him to go to England for education.
It's like he's their investment in the future.
Yeah, that hope that he'll come back with the knowledge to elevate the entire community.
And you really see that in the prayer meeting before he leaves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like they're laying out his entire life plan.
Study law, return, handle land disputes, be the village hero.
They're putting so much faith in him.
But then there's that description young Obi gives of Lagos.
Oh, you mean that almost fairy tale version of the city?
Yeah. Electric lights shining like the sun, cars at your beck and call, everyone on the move.
Full of youthful naivete.
And then he comes back from England and
Reality hits hard.
Lagos is not that idyllic vision.
He's confronted with poverty, corruption, the grime of city life.
It's a brutal reality check.
Far cry from what he imagined.
And that proverb, the one about he who fights for a ne'er-do-well,
Has nothing to show for it except a head covered in earth and grime.
I feel like it foreshadows the struggles ahead, both for Obi and his village.
It definitely works on multiple levels.
A warning against supporting those deemed unworthy, but also, like you said, reflects the challenges of change itself.
It makes you wonder if their investment in Obi will actually lead to progress or just dirt and disappointment.
Especially as his choices become more questionable. Because it's not just Lagos that's different when he returns, right? Obi himself has changed.
Oh, absolutely. His experiences in England, exposure to new ideas.
He comes back with this critical lens, almost judging Nigerian society.
He's caught between these two worlds now.
Umuofia's values versus the modernity of England.
He no longer feels truly at ease in either place.
And this clash is so evident in his reaction to the corruption he sees.
Like with the customs officer.
Yeah, the one who wants to bribe him.
He's instantly disgusted.
Wants nothing to do with it.
He's clinging to his morals, trying to stay untainted.
But I remember that line he says, if there was a policeman here, I would hand you over to him.
Almost like he needs that external authority to reinforce his commitment to honesty.
It makes you wonder, is it really about integrity or fear of getting caught?
Achebe plants that seed of doubt, doesn't he?
Definitely. It makes you question how long he can resist the pressure to compromise.
Especially with all the other challenges he's facing.
And then love enters the picture, complicating things even further. He meets her in England, and there's this clear connection.
But she's hesitant to tell his parents about their relationship.
Which brings us to one of the most complex aspects of the novel.
The Osu caste system.
It's fascinating how this ancient prejudice persists even as Nigeria modernizes.
It's a deep-rooted system with a long and troubling history.
Could you explain it a bit for our listeners?
Essentially, the Osus were outcasts, dedicated to a god.
Often as a result of crime or misfortune in the past, right?
Yeah, and that stigma, it stayed with them, their descendants too.
So even though times are changing, this prejudice continues to have a powerful hold on people's lives.
Influencing their choices, their relationships.
And this is what Obi runs up against when Clara reveals that she's Osu.
It's a turning point in the story.
It forces him to confront this prejudice head-on.
Despite his education, his supposed enlightenment.
His friend, Joseph, really embodies that generation clinging to tradition.
Trying to warn him about the consequences of marrying Clara.
Telling him it will taint his family for generations.
You know, book, he says, but this is no matter for book.
Basically arguing that real life in Nigeria is more complicated than what he learned in England.
That his book smarts don't equip him to deal with these deeply ingrained social structures.
And then there's his mother's reaction.
Intense.
She threatens suicide if he goes through with it.
The depth of her prejudice? It's heartbreaking.
You can feel Obi's inner turmoil.
Torn between love and family.
An impossible choice.
And all the while, the cracks in his idealism are widening.
He's starting to feel the financial pressures.
The weight of everyone's expectations.
That temptation to just take the easy way out.
Like with Mr. Mark.
The guy who offers him a bribe.
At first, he rejects it outright.
But you can sense that shift in his thinking.
He starts to question if his stance is even practical.
In this environment where compromise seems to be the norm.
And then there's that small but significant moment with Charles the messenger.
The one who asks for a loan and subtly hints at a bribe.
By crossing out only on his request.
Exactly.
It shows how corruption seeps into even the smallest interactions.
How those seemingly insignificant compromises can lead you down a slippery slope.
And Obi's already rationalizing it.
Telling himself it's just how things are done in Nigeria.
It seems he's on his way to becoming no longer at ease.
Definitely. We'll have to delve into those later chapters to see just how far he falls.
I'm eager to see how it all unfolds. Things take a darker turn, though, right? In these later excerpts.
Definitely, like with Claire's pregnancy.
And the botched abortion attempt.
It really feels like a point of no return for Obi.
It's heartbreaking, the desperation they're both feeling.
That frantic search for a doctor.
Trapped by circumstances, their choices.
And then that scene at the hospital when Obi is denied access to Clara.
It's just so raw, so painful.
It highlights the lack of options for women like Clara in that society, right?
Absolutely. And the pressure to conform, the stigma surrounding premarital relationships.
You really feel their vulnerability.
And then amidst this crisis, there's that striking image of the eternal sacred order of cherubim and seraphim procession that Obi encounters.
Like a visual representation of the chaos he's experiencing internally.
You know, you're right. The procession with its vibrant colors, the music, the ecstatic dancing.
Almost feels symbolic.
It represents that complex religious landscape of Nigeria at the time, right?
That blend of Christianity and traditional African spirituality.
People trying to reconcile these different belief systems.
Like Obi himself, caught between these two worlds.
Exactly.
And then to make matters worse, his mother dies.
Adding another layer of tragedy to his already crumbling world.
It's a devastating blow, emotionally and financially.
All those societal expectations surrounding her funeral.
That pressure to provide a proper burial even though he's struggling.
And the shame associated with failing to meet those expectations.
It's like he's being judged not just for his personal failings, but for not upholding these cultural traditions.
Exactly.
And that scrutiny is really evident in the Umofia Progressive Union meeting, right?
Oh, absolutely. Then they discuss his mother's funeral and the whole Osu issue.
That metaphor they use, the bird landing on the anthill.
Remember that?
Yeah, it's so symbolic.
It represents Obi's lack of progress, despite all their hopes.
He was supposed to soar to new heights.
But in their eyes, he's stuck, grounded by his choices.
A disappointment to those who invested so much in him.
And it leads to that emotional breakdown.
His retreat into isolation.
Brushing his teeth with shaving cream.
It's like he's completely exhausted mentally and emotionally.
No longer able to cope.
And his relationship with Clara is falling apart too.
She sees right through him, you know.
When she says, I ought to have been able to take care of myself.
It speaks volumes about her disillusionment.
Her realization that she can't rely on him.
And then you have Christopher offering his perspective on the whole thing.
Which is just shocking.
Comparing offering money to offering one's body.
Suggesting sleeping with a woman isn't as bad as taking a bribe.
It's such a callous reaction to Clara's plight.
He even jokes about a woman who considered suicide after her children drowned.
Christopher embodies this cynical worldview, right?
Like a pragmatic, almost nihilistic approach to life in Nigeria.
Where survival often means compromising your morals.
A stark contrast to Obi's initial idealism.
And then we have that pivotal moment, the bribe that finally breaks him.
He tries to resist. You can feel him clinging to those last shreds of integrity.
But the pressure is just too much.
Financial ruin, his mother's funeral, Clara slipping away.
He's reached a breaking point.
And the way Achebe describes him accepting the bribe, it's so powerful.
A quiet surrender, almost.
Like he's not even fighting it anymore.
Just accepting his fate.
And the irony is, it's a relatively small bribe.
It shows how insidious corruption can be.
It's not always about grand schemes.
It's those seemingly insignificant compromises that chip away at your values.
And then Mr. Green launching into that tirade.
About the mentality of the educated Nigerian.
Blaming them for the very system created by colonialism.
The hypocrisy is just astounding.
And Obi, defeated and disillusioned.
Just makes vague noises in response.
He's lost the energy to fight back.
Resigned to his role in this corrupt society.
No longer at ease. It's a powerful story, isn't it? And a tragic one.
It really makes you think about personal responsibility.
How our choices shape who we become.
But also the role of society, the pressures we face.
That nature versus nurture debate.
Right. How much is predetermined and how much is within our control?
Achebe doesn't give us any easy answers.
It just presents this nuanced portrait of a man caught in the middle.
Obi, a product of his environment, but also making choices that lead to his own downfall.
And it's even more tragic because of all the potential he had.
The village placed so much hope in him, invested so much.
They believed in him.
He was supposed to be their ticket to a better future.
And in a way, he represents that whole generation grappling with change,
The old ways crumbling, the new ways uncertain.
trying to find their place in a world in transition.
It's like that scene where he tries to explain Lagos to the villagers before leaving for England, painting that idealized picture.
Of modernity and progress.
But the reality he encounters is so much harsher.
That gap between expectation and reality, it's a recurring theme.
Definitely.
We see it in Obi's life, his relationships. He's constantly trying to reconcile these conflicting ideas.
And it's not just him, the Umuofia Progressive Union too.
They're trying to hold onto tradition while adapting to a new Nigeria.
That struggle to bridge the past and the present.
It's a struggle that often leads to conflict and casualties.
And Obi becomes one of those casualties.
Torn between his village's expectations and his own desires.
His love for Clara, societal prejudice.
His ideals versus the reality of a corrupt system.
It's interesting how Achebe uses language to reflect that internal conflict.
Yeah, how his English starts to shift as he becomes more disillusioned.
Incorporating more Igbo phrases.
Almost like he's retreating back into his cultural roots.
Trying to reclaim a part of himself that he lost along the way.
And his final downfall, the bribe.
It's not just a personal failure, is it? It's symbolic of a much larger societal decay.
The corruption eating away at Nigeria?
No longer at ease. A powerful indictment of colonialism.
And its lasting impact.
It forces you to think about cultural change.
The challenges of reconciling tradition and modernity.
The personal costs of societal expectations.
It's a story that really stays with you.
Makes you confront uncomfortable truths.
About yourself, your society, the choices we make.
It reminds us that progress is a process.
There will be setbacks,
Disappointments.
but we can't give up hope,
We have to keep fighting for what we believe in.
even when it feels impossible.
So as you reflect on No Longer at Ease,
Here's something to consider.
what if Obi had stayed true to his ideals?
Could he have made a difference?
Or would he have just become another marginalized voice?
It's a question with no easy answers.
But it's worth pondering.
As you explore Achebe's work and its enduring relevance.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into No Longer at Ease.